Stay with me for this one. This gets crazy. But you got Okah Tubbee, okay? It says the Medina Citizen gives some further facts in the relation to the recent marriage of the Indian and YT women, of which some account has been published. Okah Tubbee acknowledges that he has another wife to whom he has been married 15 years and had 3 children by her. This squaw was at Buffalo at the time of his marriage. The Indian says that he was married to his first wife only for a term of years, according to the custom of the nation, that the time had expired and he had renounced her, basically divorced, as the laws of the Choctaws permitted him to do. The YT woman, who is married to the Indian now, is 40 years of age and has been an inmate in the Utica Asylum, which she evidently left too soon. So I first saw this. This was the first article I saw, and it says, "Damn, I was just laughing." They talking about how she crazy for marrying this person. Basically, she was in the asylum and she left too soon. I was like, boy, they be shitting on people in the newspapers. But then I kept looking at other articles, not even related to this, and I came across this. This one in 1851 in the Cincinnati Enquirer, and it says. First of all, I saw this thing right here that says Choctaw Chief was a Louisville Negro. So stay tuned. But I was like, okay, what's this Dr. Okah Tubbee? That's the same dude from the last thing, but he has a doctor right there. So it says here, some of the papers have published on account of a romantic marriage between Okah Tubbee, an Indian chief, rather famous as a flute player, as well as a worthless scamp. They talking about the worthless scamp he was with, and a YT woman, talking about the first marriage and then the new YT woman. And then it says, it now appears that Okah Tubbee acknowledges that he has another wife to whom he was married 15 years and the children by the young squaw, and he was at Buffalo at the time of the marriage. The Indian says that he was married to his first wife, blah, blah, blah. The same thing for the Choctaws, whatever. But then after that, it says the Baltimore Sun certainly don't take the papers, or it would have found out that the Choctaw chief is a Louisville Negro, okay? Louisville Negro. And this same thing was printed in multiple papers, okay? Here's Richmond Daily Times, and it says a romance spoiled, and some of the things talk about Okah Tubbee, a chief, Indian chief, flute player, all that stuff, right? But this one doesn't talk about, and it talks about the Choctaws, but doesn't talk about him being a Negro from Louisville, you know? So I went and did some looking up here and there, and I found this. And what they try to say, this is a Choctaw Nation talking about Okah Tubbee specifically, and what they try to say is he was born to an African American woman who was enslaved by the name of Frankie Tubbee, and that she was enslaved by some dude, whatever, and then eventually they released him, and at some point he became a chief of the Choctaws. And it just didn't make sense to me that this man was enslaved and then somehow became chief of the Choctaws, unless it was after some war with the Choctaws and they made them all enslaved Choctaws, which, would have been us, and then something of the sort. But I still wasn't believing this. So I went and looked even further. And just to show here that they're talking about the same person, in here it talks about him being a flute player. At the testimonials from his friend who vouched for Okah Tubbee's flute playing abilities and a program of the performance. The main thing I really took out of this was the fact that they do acknowledge that he's a Negro. Okay, even though some of those other newspapers don't talk about it, they do acknowledge that he's a Negro. They try to attribute it to some kind of enslaving and then freed situation. But unfortunately for them, I was able to find a book completely about Mr. Chief Okah Tubbee right here, okay? The thrilling sketch of the distinguished Chief Okah Tubbee. Copper-colored Okah Tubbee. And inside here, it tells his name on the first page. Okah Tubbee, his alias was William Chubby, because Chubby was his real last name. How do you know? In the biography of this book, Mushala Chubby, the father of the subject of the memoir, was a chief of the Choctaws who inhabited a scope of the country of the Yazoo River. I'm gonna try to show that to you. About 100 miles west of the Mississippi River, of the tribe he will briefly allude to their present situation after alluding to a treaty between the eastern and western Indians. Okay? Couldn't find my Yazoo River document that showed the river, but whatever. Long story short, man, it just goes to show we got a chief named Okah Tubbee who was famous back then, and his dad was a famous chief, and they're trying to contribute that his mom was an enslaved person. How does that make sense when his dad was the chief? Okay, they had to tie some kind of slave story to it, and even if there was some kind of slave story based upon a war, with them leaving out the context of that war, it leads you to believe that it was some kind of enslaved African that got freed and became some kind of Choctaw randomly, and then all of a sudden just rose to the ranks of being a Choctaw chief. It doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is this guy was banging on some YT woman that made y'all mad enough to put it in the paper. Y'all was pissed. She was in the insane asylum. It looks like she could have got out a little too soon and all that shit, man. Look, it's crazy, man. The ancestors be talking to me and they be showing up in stories. I just randomly came across the first story that I started off with, like I showed y'all, and then randomly it veered off to this whole thing. Who knew it was some dude who had a whole book written about him? Who knew he was a whole Choctaw chief from his pops? Crazy. Louisville Negro at that. They playing.